The Australian Financial Review.
Taking accountability is not always easy, but the benefits often outweigh the risks.
It's a force multiplier for cultural strength when you own up to accountability. And from there you can build on actually doing great things together because you kind of take ownership and you take the burden. It's just such a sign of confidence to say that I've made a mistake and actually I'm going to grow from it.
Welcome to 15 Minutes with the Boss, a podcast about success, failure, and all the lessons learnt along the way. I'm your host, Sally Patton, and my guest today is Russell Cohen, the Chief Executive of PEXA, a company valued at $3 billion that processes 90% of all property transfer settlements in Australia. Hi, Russell, how are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Now, Russell, before joining PEXA, you were a senior executive at Singaporean rideshare business Grab. So how did you end up working in property?
That's a great question. So I'm originally from Melbourne. I left Melbourne in late 2008 and I've lived in Asia pretty much until March of this year. Initially in Hong Kong, then Singapore, then I did 3 years in Tokyo, and then I came back to Singapore in 2017 to join Grab, which was a really fast-growing small ride-hailing company, based in Singapore, growing fast across Southeast Asia, really exciting company. And then, I had gone through successive kind of growth trajectories at Grab. Significantly, we acquired Uber's business in 2018 in the region and then sort of went through COVID, which was a pretty interesting time for our industry. Ride-hailing goes to 0 and food delivery goes to 100, that kind of extreme. And then we had a public listing. And so through those kind of journeys, I felt ready to lead an organisation. That was an ambition of mine, but I felt that I had accumulated the skills and the confidence to step into a role leading a large organisation. And so it was really an outreach last year when PEXA reached out.
Well, Russell, we don't have long. We've only got 15 minutes. I'm going to start the clock right now. And my first question is about your morning routine. What time do you get up? Do you have breakfast? Tell me what it all looks like.
Yeah, so I normally get up around 5:36. Kind of a natural alarm wakes me up. I will typically check the news headlines quickly, bit of a news junkie, look at some stock prices overnight, things like that. I try and stay away from email and messaging early in the morning, kind of saving that for when I've got a little more headspace. That's a recent behaviour and actually it's working quite well for me. I'll then typically do some stretching, like a mobility routine that I picked up over the last few years, and I kind of got it down through COVID, something I try and do every morning, some stretches, some yoga routines. And then I will generally walk. I'm a big walker, so I'll walk early in the morning just by myself, listen to a podcast or, listen to some music. 2 mornings a week I'll do weight training, typically with a trainer just to make sure I don't injure myself. I've learnt the hard way there. And then I'll make my way home, have a little breakfast, and then get to the office sort of around 8:30ish, maybe 8 or 9, somewhere between that window.
And are you a breakfast person?
I am. I've tried doing no breakfast, but I cannot. So I like breakfast. I've got a very, very clear routine. I'll have just a bit of either Greek yogurt and fruit and maybe some muesli, or I'll have some eggs if I've got a little more time. That's pretty much it. And then I'll have a coffee a bit later. I don't love coffee first thing in the morning. I generally have coffee probably about an hour later, usually at the office.
My next question is about your career. Can you tell me about a pivotal moment in your career, a promotion you were given, a project that you perhaps took on that changed the trajectory of what you were doing?
So I've had a few, but one that was pretty significant was my journey to Japan. So at that stage, I was leading a large regional business from Singapore, and I got a call one day from the CEO of the company. The company was called Brightstar, and he mentioned to me that he had pitched and sold very quickly a deal to SoftBank, the big Japanese telco at the time. And it was a deal to handle all of SoftBank's trade in iPhones as they were getting ready for the launch of the new iPhone 5. So it's about September 2012. This is a pretty common thing today. You trade in your device when you sign a new contract or you upgrade, but it was a very novel concept at the time and didn't exist in a mainstream way in Japan. And so I got on a plane the next day, flew to Tokyo, built this business really just with a very small team and with SoftBank, and we launched it. And it was a huge success for both Brightstar and SoftBank, a really differentiated proposition and built into the mainstream mobile industry in Japan. From there, I went into SoftBank because they acquired part of Brightstar progressively and eventually the whole thing. And so it led me into SoftBank and just to a whole new world, a whole new network, a whole new set of experiences, both culturally and professionally.
If you had never done that before, how did you go about setting up this new business?
Yeah, so I'd set up businesses before. I'd set up a number of businesses before, very early stage ideas, taking really just a pitch and building a business. But doing it in Japan was a whole different thing. I didn't speak Japanese. I didn't have a network there. And so, there's a certain amount of intuition and a certain amount of confidence you got to have when you go about there, how to identify talent, how to pick the right partners. Again, you're sitting in a room with a bunch of lawyers, the contracts are in Japanese, all those kinds of things. And you just kind of work your way through it. You got to have a high tolerance for risk as well. And we were an entrepreneurial company. And so that environment was supportive of that kind of risk taking.
So would you say that you do have a high tolerance for risk?
In a business sense, yeah. Yeah, I do.
Is that high tolerance something that you have to temper a little bit, or how does that play out?
Yeah, so you do have to temper it. You have to find the right moments when risk is appropriate. And I guess that's something you learn through your career. Which are the right settings when you can take a lot of risk? I had a boss once, a great mentor, who said to me, as you progress up, you've got to focus on the few things that really move the needle in the company, both on the upside and the downside. And that sort of helps you hone your focus as a leader. It can be very alluring to focus on very, very minute things. And sometimes it's important to get into the details. But fundamentally, as I progressed in my career, it's about kind of identifying which are the really big things that are going to be most fundamental to the business or the customer experience or the way in which you allocate capital. So that's kind of how I use my framework now in terms of risk management.
My next question is about career advice.
Sure.
What's the best piece of career advice you've ever been given?
The best advice I've been given, and it's one I share often with folks that I coach or I mentor, is if you share your goals with people that you trust, it's quite interesting how often they help you achieve them. This sounds like corporate fate. I don't think that's the case. I think fundamentally it's the subconscious desire of people to help you. Their goodness comes out, and it could just be they're in the room when a promotion's being discussed. They're in a room when a new business is being discussed. They're in a room when a kind of talent development discussion's being had, and they just think of you, or you are top of mind for them. I've seen repeatedly people kind of helping out and sort of subconsciously saying, oh yeah, no, I remember sharing that with that person, that I wanted that promotion or that opportunity or a chance to work on that specific kind of deal. And time again, those folks have been supported.
Interesting. And can you give me an example of when that has happened for you?
I had a long desire to run a business, lead a vertical, and I had shared that with my manager at the time. And so I was leading a series of kind of business development projects.
And where were you then?
This is when I was at Brightstar. This is probably 2006, 2007. And I had shared my ambition during sort of a regular kind of performance catch-up that I had an ambition to lead an organisation and be a P&L owner. And, through that opportunity, and at that stage, back to your point about risk, I was leading 2 or 3 simultaneously. One ended up working significantly. That was in Hong Kong. I actually thought that would be the conclusion and I would hand off to someone else. And he called me up one day and he said, you know what, you should go up and move to Hong Kong and be the general manager and build this business. And I was like, oh yeah, that's my ambition. And I just didn't think it was on the cards for me at that stage. So that's a good example of where that played out for me.
Okay, Russell, we are going to take a short break. And when we come back, you pick the questions. I'll see you soon. Welcome back to 15 Minutes with the Boss. I'm here with Russell Cohen, the Chief Executive of real estate settlement giant PEXA. Now, Russell, in front of you is a somewhat scruffy cardboard box with about 20 random questions inside. For the time we have left, I'm going to ask you to pick some out one by one, so let's get started. How do you make tough decisions?
Tough decisions are often about people. I mean, they can involve business decisions and how you allocate money and which projects to kind of invest in, but so often it's about people. And so my general principle in being an effective people leader is really just to focus on communication. That can be one-on-one, can be to a small group, can be to the whole company, can be publicly, but it's really about the crispness of that communication, the integrity of that communication, and the consistency of that message. Don't having variability, don't have different stories for different people. And so making tough decisions starts with very clear communication, consistent narrative, consistent rationale, and therefore build some understanding from all parties. And so that's kind of how I ground my tough decisions, is in being very clear in the communication and the rationale proceeding from there.
So before you go into a meeting where you've got to make the tough decision, do you rehearse in your head how you're going to formulate your message?
Yeah, I do. I'll often bounce it off someone I trust. I might call up a colleague or someone who's also party to the decision say, all right, so let's just walk through the rationale again because I'm going to share it with the team or I'm going to share it with these people. Could be an outside business partner as well that you're breaking some difficult news to. And I walk through the rationale and then I'm effectively rehearsed in my mind so that when I can share it with others, I've already gone through it.
So what do you think about this idea that when people are delivering bad news or making a tough decision, they start off with the positive and you just know there's a but coming?
I find it much better to just be more authentic. For me, that's to really frame the context first. So sometimes going through the decisions and the data we may have looked at to get to the decision, I find that much more useful than offering a positive before the negative, if that makes sense. Just walking through the process and how we've arrived at the decision, people generally have responded well to, particularly at PEXA actually in this role.
Okay, next question. Have another fish in the box. If you could relive one day in your career, which day would it be and why?
Wow. One day in my career. I can remember the day. So I had joined Grab in the middle of 2017 and 9 months later we acquired Uber's business in Southeast Asia. This was a very complicated project and the day of the announcement, it was such a monumental moment for Grab, which was this small, scrappy little Southeast Asian company that started sort of battling Uber, which was a super impressive global giant in many ways. And the groundswell of motivation and energy and purpose and confirmation that all the hard work that the Grab people many years before me had put in right up until that day had paid off, and that being authentically local and speaking to customers in Southeast Asia in a very genuine and sincere and on-the-ground way was the way to win in the market. And it was just such a memorable day. I can still remember the moment of the announcement, the town halls, when everyone dialed in, the little toasts we did in the small conference room. That was probably the most significant and memorable day of my career.
So that was clearly a very big acquisition for a company of Grab size.
Yes.
What was the key lesson from that?
So again, I come back to communication. There was a lot of communication that needed to be done through different channels, both to staff who were impacted by the transaction. Then, of course, there's a big marketplace out there of drivers and passengers, and getting all the communication very clear on the rationale for the acquisition, how the transition would occur, how they may be impacted, how they could migrate over to the Grab platform, all the customer service implications. Then, of course, there was a regulatory message as well because it was a very, very significant transaction and these were regulated spaces. So that's kind of one thing I learned through it. The second one is, I built a little kind of project team around me of just trusted folks who could really execute at a very high degree. And each of them had a very clear plan. They could run relatively independently, and then we kind of synced up once a day or every few days. So again, just those kind of very small but highly empowered execution teams was really something that I had been practicing and honing for a number of years, but then put into practice in the case of that transaction, which was actually done in a relatively short window.
Okay, have another fish in the box. This is my favourite question. What's your pet hate in the office?
I have tried to practice through a long career of making a lot of mistakes. I've tried to practice being very public and very candid about accountability. Where I've made a mistake, where I've fallen short, where I've missed a deadline. Like I really try to own up to it. And I think I've got to set that example, particularly as I've had roles of increasing seniority. And so one of my pet hates is when it's so obvious that there is somebody who is accountable and would actually, the team or the company or the organisation would benefit from ownership and a demonstration of high personal integrity and owning up to that shortcoming when they evade that. Or don't own up to it. And then again, there's often, kind of cultural ramifications that come from that. So I'm a big believer in owning up to the accountability, when you've fallen short, when you've missed something and you've let someone down. And it's not necessarily that I'm focusing on the negative, but I just think it's a force multiplier for cultural strength when you own up to accountability. And from there, you can build on actually doing great things together because you kind of take ownership and you take the burden.
So how do you think people can learn to take accountability? Because I assume that one of the reasons that people don't is that they think they're going to get hounded by someone or maybe even lose their job or have their bonus docked. Like there
Sure.
might be some lack of confidence. So how could I, if I were in that position, feel comfortable being accountable?
Yeah. So that fear is real, you're right, and that's a global phenomenon. I've worked all over the world and I've seen that. That's not just a specific cultural thing in any one market. I think framing the accountability with an introduction at the front. Look, I'm going to own up to this. I know that I've fallen short. I know that I've let the team down, and I'm letting you know to show you what it's like when I take accountability. And I hope as a team we can all do that when we've each fallen short. So actually framing it and effectively laying the groundwork for a bit of empathy and understanding at the beginning is very, very powerful. And often people will say, you know what, thanks for saying that. Thanks for saying that. I've seen that time and time again. It's just such a sign of confidence to say that, I've made a mistake and actually I'm going to grow from it.
Yeah, so get over the fear.
Yeah.
Be accountable, and you'll probably find that other people respect you more for it.
That's exactly right. It's a maturing moment for the organisation and often for the person.
Okay, I'm going to take that away with me. Have another fish in the box.
Okay.
What's a misconception people have about CEOs and other leaders?
One of the misconceptions I think people have broadly around senior leaders is that they're difficult to talk to. Naturally, it's intimidating for a lot of people, but that intimidation then follows that it's actually going to be a difficult conversation. It has to be a rehearsed conversation. It needs to be a very formal conversation, whereas in actual fact, the opposite is probably much more useful, a much more human conversation, a real conversation where you might share what's on your mind, advice you may be seeking, or even advice you'd like to give the other way. I've had a number of people come up to me in my 6 months at PEXA and just say to me, look, I know you're new and we haven't met, but I just want to give you a little bit of advice on things that I've observed in the organisation, the way I heard what you said. And it's been so clarifying to me and again, hugely appreciated because I've been busy, but also a lot of people are intimidated to come up and offer this kinds of feedback. So I'd say to people, find the time, go through the right channel. Maybe you need to book time with their EA or you need to send them a note to say, hey, do you have 5 minutes to chat? But it's generally so appreciated and actually hugely useful for the organisation.
So actually also just treat your boss like a human being and talk to them as such.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that. All right, on that note, I've now got one more question that I ask every guest, and that is, if you weren't for some reason the chief executive of PEXA, not that we are wishing that upon you, what would you be doing?
I would be a chef. From a young age, I really enjoyed cooking. I really enjoyed preparing food for others and then sort of observing and hearing what they thought of it. I think I'd be a chef in a kind of fast-paced, kind of not fine dining restaurant, but somewhere between, kind of an average meal and a high-end restaurant where people come and kind of really focus on the food and get to know the staff and that kind of friendly environment. So that's probably with a French-style cuisine. That'd be my ideal.
Wow. Okay.
Non-CEO role.
A non-CEO role.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you all the very best in your future career as a chef in a French or French-style restaurant. I look forward to coming to that.
Thank you.
On that note, our time is up. Thank you so much for allowing us to spend 15 minutes with the boss.
Thank you for having me. It was great to meet you.
And thank you to everyone for listening. If you like the podcast and you want to hear more, consider sharing the podcast or writing a review as it helps us to reach more people. And follow us wherever you get your podcasts. At the Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. For more, go to afr.com and you can subscribe to the Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. This podcast was hosted by me, Sally Patton, produced and edited by Mandy Coulin and Iona Rennie. Head of audio is Alex Gow, and our executive producer is Fiona Buffini. See you next week.
The Australian Financial Review.